These are North Korean troops in Russia, supposedly being trained to go and fight in Ukraine. So that's cool. Today we're going to dive into what we know about North Korean troops joining the Russian war effort, why North Korea would agree to this, some reactions from key leaders around the world, what this could mean for the war going forward, as well as global implications of this new escalation. Now, last Thursday, Ukrainian President Zelensky stated that North Korea was sending troops to fight with Russia, saying, quote, "One of the main points was the intelligence report on Russian intentions for the fall and winter. Everything is quite detailed, including the de facto involvement of North Korea in the war," end quote. Now, that one raised some eyebrows and was pretty quickly followed by the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, Budanov, who said that approximately 11,000 North Korean soldiers are currently in eastern Russia, undergoing training to potentially participate in combat in Ukraine. He added that these troops that are reportedly set to use Russian equipment and ammunition are expected to be ready for deployment to the front by November 1st. Budanov added that the initial contingent of 2,600 North Korean soldiers will be dispatched to the Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces continue to hold back an ongoing Russian counterattack. Then the very next day, South Korean intelligence released a more detailed report where they said that North Korea began moving special forces for dispatch to Russia back on October 8th. They said that 4 landing ships and 3 escort ships belonging to the Russian Pacific Fleet completed its first transport of approximately 1,500 North Korean soldiers to Vladivostok, Russia, and the second transport is set to take place here shortly. Now, notably, this is the first time the Russian Navy has entered North Korean waters since 1990, which certainly hints at something pretty unique happening here. Now, South Korean intelligence went on to say that the North Koreans were issued Russian uniforms and weapons, as well as fake ID cards to make it look like they're residents of Siberia, with the overall intention of hiding their true identities when they eventually deploy to the front. Now, we have to consider why North Korea might do this to better understand if these reports are accurate and indicative of what would be a major escalation in this war. I mean, even if it's just the 1,500 so far reported by South Korea, this is the first official deployment of foreign troops to fight in this war. Not volunteers, uniformed military personnel from an allied country going to fight alongside their partner. That's big. There have already been a pretty solid track record of cooperation between Russia and North Korea during this war. It's estimated that North Korea has already provided Russia with more than 8 million artillery rounds, as well as rockets, missiles, RPGs, and other munitions that have all been used against Ukraine. Then this past June, Russian President Putin visited North Korea for the first time in 24 years, and about a week ago, the two countries signed a mutual defense pact designed to help each other if they had to repel external aggression, which is something to keep in mind when we're talking about the possibility of some of these North Korean troops being used inside of Russia to try to push back the Ukrainians in Kursk. Now, there's a real argument here that the war in Ukraine has actually been good for Kim Jong-un and North Korea. As Russia has found themselves in need of mass quantities of ammunition, there are very few places they could actually look, especially when considering just how much they actually needed. North Korea, well known for amassing sizable stockpiles, stepped up to the plate and traded artillery rounds and rockets for food and raw materials. With few allies to turn to, Russia took advantage of the opportunity, and it's possible North Korea is now getting even more in exchange for sending troops into the fight. The South Korean ambassador to the United Nations speculated on this, saying, quote, "For the participation of its troops, the DPRK will expect a generous payment from Moscow, which could include financial and military assistance, as well as technologies related to nuclear weapons," end quote. You got to think that South Korean intelligence, which is pretty solid, all things considered, has some insight into what North Korea is actually getting here, but a few things to keep in mind as we hear this. First, North Korea is so isolated that simply more food and basic materials, depending on the quantities, of course, could be a decent win for Kim Jong-un in this specific case. Financial and military assistance might be kind of hard for Russia right now. I mean, their economy is technically still buzzing along, but they're not really in a place to send off any sort of significant aid package. Also, if they're looking to North Korea for troops and equipment, any military assistance would likely have to come in the form of sharing technology or maybe some sort of intelligence assets. Of course, the nuclear issue always needs to be considered here, and we'd have to think just how much Russia would ask in exchange for anything nuclear related. I mean, that's a huge sliding scale because we're talking about everything from technology to storage, weapons delivery, targeting, and quite a bit more. So it's on the table, but of course, it's not clear that that's in any way included in this current deal. All right, turning to the global response, and to be blunt, we just don't have a ton of official statements right now, which is kind of muddying the waters. Mostly what we're seeing are unnamed officials talking about how they're monitoring this situation, and it is a potential big deal. This actually makes me a little skeptical when running through this whole story. A third country deploying thousands of combat soldiers to fight in this war would be a first. That immediately expands the conflict, and the fact that it's North Korea adds in some real complexity around the security situation in Asia. So if this plays out, as some are reporting, it very well could be the moment we look back on this as to when the war between Russia and Ukraine truly turned global. Given the implications of a move like this, I would expect more senior government figures to be, talking it up every single chance they get. Instead, it's sort of flying under the radar. I mean, it is getting attention in the media, but not by key government figures. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what to make of that right now, but felt like it was at least, part of this story worth sharing. Now, I don't want to give the impression that the United States has been silent, because that's not the case, just very little to go off of at this point. For instance, on October 21st, Deputy UN Ambassador Robert Wood told the Security Council that it would, quote, be a dangerous and highly concerning development if North Korea was sending troops to help Russia and Ukraine, adding that, quote, we are consulting with our allies and partners of the implications of such a dramatic move. Then moving over to South Korea, their defense minister said, quote, it is highly likely that North Korean troops have been deployed in Russia and are participating in combat in Ukraine, warning that this could lead to further escalation. So right there, we're sort of seeing the differences in statements coming out. The U.S. still seems to be talking about if this were to happen, whereas South Korea is saying that it already has, and North Korean troops are right now engaged in combat operations. Again, that type of disconnect between major allies, at least in what's being said publicly, gives me kind of a weird feeling. I can't put my finger on it, but it's really, really hard right now to tell exactly what's playing out. Now, a North Korean official at the United Nations just denied these reports, for what it's worth, saying, quote, as for the so-called military cooperation with Russia, my delegation does not see the need to comment on such baseless, stereotypical rumors aimed at tarnishing the image of the DPRK and undermining the legitimate, friendly, and partnership relations between the two sovereign states, end quote. And that's the same reaction we're getting from the Russian government. Well, actually, we're getting less from the Russian government. From what I can tell, not a single Russian official has even commented on this, at all. But I'll tell you what, if North Korea can provide troops and ammunition to Russia, we can certainly provide a few trucks to Ukrainian military units. Look, I teamed up with Help 99 a couple weeks ago to try to get 3 vehicles for 3 specific units inside of the Ukrainian military. The link is in the pinned comment and the description below. We're already over $10,000 raised in just the 10 days this campaign has been live. Be sure to check it out. There's some really cool kind of incentives. You've got patches. You can put your text on the side of one of these vehicles, or if you donate enough, you can actually deliver the vehicle yourself to the Ukrainian units. Check it out, description below. Now, Russian mill blogger Alexander Kotz laid out some possible use cases for these North Korean soldiers on Telegram, where he wrote, quote, where do the boys get their Korean sadness from? Frankly speaking, the supposed number of North Korean fighters that all the world media is now trumpeting is just not all that impressive. It's depressing. What is the use of 12,000 inexperienced people who do not speak Russian, who are not familiar with the realities of modern combat tactics? And yet, if the decision to send North Koreans to us is made, how will it look? End quote. So right away, he calls out something that a lot of people are mentioning right now. There is a clear language barrier between North Korean and Russian troops. Of course, this would be a problem during any real-time communications at the front, but it's also a real hurdle with anything leading up to that. From training to transportation, logistics, medical support, really everything. Russia and North Korea would have to develop some sort of robust dual language program to even get these guys close to the front at all. Of course, that can be done, but it is a pretty tall order. Back to Kotz, he says, quote, if, for example, KPA units end up in the Kursk region, then this is internationally recognized territory of the Russian Federation. And we, to put it mildly, should not care at all who says what about this. They're unlikely to have a significant impact on the course of military operations, but they will gain real combat experience, which they will be able to pass on to their brothers in arms, and they will return in such numbers that the enemy will have to worry seriously about them. End quote. Look, he actually has a pretty good point there. If North Korean forces stay inside of Russia, that is a far lesser escalation than pushing them into Ukraine. This doesn't put the two parties entirely in the clear. I mean, South Korea is already pretty livid and likely to respond in some fashion, and Ukraine certainly won't take kindly to any of their troops coming under fire or being killed by North Koreans. However, on this hypothetical scale of escalation, this is a bit lower than Russian North Korean battalions into the Donbass. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we have to remember that North Korea and Russia just signed this mutual defense pact specifically aimed at stopping and pushing back any external aggression against their nations. It's possible Russia is kind of leveraging that in the Kursk region. Then Kotz added, quote, "They can easily go to the war zone as volunteers. The Russian army provides not only for foreigners to participate in combat operations on a contract basis, but also for them to receive Russian citizenship," end quote. This right here is where I'd put my money. There's really no benefit for their uniformed personnel with North Korean flags on their shoulders engaging in combat operations for Russia. They won't be doing this for any sort of international recognition, but the recognition from Russia and any benefits that could come from that relationship. So having these North Korean volunteers as foreign soldiers puts this whole thing into the gray zone where Russia has really thrived in the past 10 years or so. Remember the little green men in Crimea when Russian forces went down there? We, the United States and the broader West, really stumbled with that. We knew they were Russians, but there was also just enough deniability for us to falter in our response. Now imagine that same strategy, but with Korean volunteers. All of a sudden the international response is just a little more complicated. Honestly, it kind of seems like it's a no-brainer for Russia and North Korea to go this route if the troops are designed to go to the front at all. Kotz added in the idea that North Korean troops could be used in missile, rocket, and artillery units in order to gain experience to take back to North Korea, and I could see that as well. They're a little ways back from the front, so there's less of a chance they're actually captured by Ukraine, less of a chance that their participation becomes well-known, but still able to directly participate in the fight. So many of the Russian systems in use today are also used by North Korea, so there's quite a few of the tactics and skill sets that will transfer over pretty quickly with the help of just a few interpreters. This gets the North Korean troops into the fight in a meaningful way quickly, while also having a real skill set they can take back to implement in their own military. Pretty decent trade-off there, if you think about it. Layer on some additional benefits, and it's not hard to see why North Korea may have agreed to this. So if we assume that this is happening and North Korean troops are on their way to the front, it does have the possibility of changing the course of this war. And there's a few ways to look at that. For starters, it does sound like South Korea would be open to sending munitions to Ukraine and maybe even allowing their citizens to go and fight in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. Both are steps they've avoided so far, as Russia made it pretty clear that doing so would perhaps prompt them to increase support for North Korea, but it kind of looks like we've already crossed that line. Now, I do want to stress that I wouldn't expect South Korea to begin any sort of formal military action in Ukraine or against North Korea. That really shouldn't be in the conversation at all right now. It's not really like a rational next step, not by a long shot. Now, short term, it could have an impact on the front lines. If we're talking about 12,000 new soldiers, that could allow Russia to possibly press a new offensive or increase pressure on the Kursk salient. Of course, 12,000 isn't enough to drastically change the outcome of the war, but it is enough to make a real difference in the tactical fight in one or two areas. Bigger picture, of course, this could further entrench the cooperation between Russia and North Korea, which could very well further isolate both on the world stage. Russia would also have to be careful to not overtly violate the wide range of sanctions against North Korea with anything they send. Also, not entirely clear that Russia really cares about that, but it's something to think about. Lastly, the response or lack of response to this addition of North Korean troops, again, if it actually plays out, will set the stage for the same thing to continue happening. I'm not sure there are many countries really chomping at the bit to send their own troops to Ukraine, but we also haven't seen it happen. So this will be a bit of a test. Will the addition of a third country rapidly expand the scope of the war, or is it possible to keep things generally contained to Ukraine and Western Russia? That is a really hard one to predict as we enter into essentially uncharted territory. So I really want to stress right now that there are a lot of rumors circulating around this story. I don't say that to downplay or discount the reporting of organizations like South Korean or Ukrainian intelligence agencies, but if you step back, we just don't have a lot of concrete evidence. The few leaked videos and pictures do appear to show that some North Koreans were moved into Russia sometime recently and are going through some sort of military in-processing. But beyond that, it's really just speculation. All right, hope that was helpful. It's a complicated subject right now, and there's a lot of mixed information circulating across the internet. If interested, be sure to check out my fundraiser in the description below. I'm working with, again, Help 99 to pick up some new trucks for a few Ukrainian military units, and we're already over $10,000 raised in just the first week or so. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.